Thanks. So welcome, everybody, to the second hour of MindShifters Radio, and today is Wednesday, July the 17th, 2024, and our call-in number is 563-999-3581. Press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us, and we would love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. And we got Peter off to the airport this morning, and he's headed back to Sweden. He said about 17 hours he should be opening his front door. So he has a long journey, so hold the space for him that his travels are sweet and that he can rest on the plane. And, you know, going through that time warp, too, that really takes a toll sometimes if you're not able to rest when you're traveling. So anyway, hold the space for him. He made some awesome progress while he was here. And it was great to see him, great to spend time with him and process with him, and awesome to have him on the show a couple of different days. And so anyway, we'll give Michael just a moment to dial in here, and I'll talk for a minute and give him a chance to get in. And so we're starting to pack things up to get back on the road tomorrow. So we will have another show played tomorrow, and it's one where Sam Brotherton called in and shared her experience with the work, and this is from back in 2019, the awesome show. So that will be played tomorrow because we will be on the road driving. And anyway, I have not done any updates on the website this week, so I can't tell you to go out and look at that. I did get a message from our app person. I have had to make a change on the Google app to match the newest Android operating system or whatever. So if you have an Android phone, be sure and go out and do the update on the Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And it should just, as you click it, and you may not see any difference because we really didn't make any changes other than setting it up to be the right, whatever they call it, to get onto the new operating system. It has to continually update so the new phones pick it up and it runs good on those phones as well. So there is an update out there, but like I said, you probably won't see any big difference to it. And Michael's with us now, so I'm going to say welcome, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome, everybody. So glad that you're here to move forward one more day in this conversation about the first century Aramaic forgiveness and all the corollary studies that we get to look at. And I just came across a quote this morning. I was doing some research and filling out the roadmap to quantum still point and what it means. And I came across a quote this morning from a neuroscientist that it's just like it's coming in left, right, and center, that ancient wisdom. So a neuroscientist named David Egelman, makes this comment about perception. He doesn't specifically say it's about perception, but here's what he offers. Your brain collects up all the information from the senses before it decides upon a story of what happened. The strange consequence of all of this is that we live in the past. So here we are, detached from actuality, and they've measured the time frame it takes, and it's between 300 and 500 milliseconds. So 1,000 parts to a second, and about 500 of those, half a second. It take that long before the brain decides which reality it's going to show for this particular experience, this particular story it's going to tell, based on what's resonated out of the actuality. And there's kind of an interesting concept that I've just been introduced to, and that is one of the things the brain does. What I'm seeing in it, there's a thing called binding processes where, light travels at a different speed than sound. The senses process things differently. And what the brain does, and they only talk about, or at least so far, what I've seen, they talk about this binding process that stitches together all these different sensory experiences to make them make sense, to unite them. But at the same time, it takes that which is united, that is, if we apply Einstein's insight that if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. So it binds up and makes one that which is separate, and that process makes that which is one separate. Just kind of an interesting dichotomy as that struck me. But more and more the neuroscientists, the labs are starting to give us the same information that a particular genius did 2,000 years ago, when he spoke of let the dead bury the dead and the blind lead the blind. If you're going to go back to your past, if that's where you live, then are you really alive? And of course, what we're looking to do with this work is to take people into the space, or to offer the tools with which we wake up from the slumber of perception, wake up from the slumber of the mind, and really, truly live in the moment, live in the actuality of the moment. So all of this is all, it just continuously comes together, and I wish I had another 87 hours a day to be with all the sources of information that need to be looked at, all the inner work that needs to be done in order to step into this space of being. And we're honored and delighted that you're part of the conversation that takes us there, and how each of your comments creates or initiates a contribution and helps to open the application, the development of the application of these tools that have their source, have their base in the first century Aramaic language and teachings of the man named Yeshua, bringing them into a true perspective, into actuality. And more as I'm working on and instead of a what is quantum still point, I've shifted that into the roadmap to quantum still point, and realizing that it really is a stitching together, if you were, of 50 years of experience, that when I first started looking at it, and if you look back to one of the early show, or the first show where I read the description, and then when I get it complete, which may actually be it may never be complete, but as it goes through different stages, realizing that what I have to do in order to create the roadmap is break it down into more of the pieces of the experiences that I've had that have led me to this place. And so it's an interesting project, and delighted that you're on the road with us. Peter, I dropped him off at the airport this morning. He had been here. We did a 5-day, and I'm thinking, in the since I've started doing the quantum still point process with people, it had been a 3-day process, and seeing a different level of result by doing a 5-day process, which is what we did with Peter. So I may actually shift that into a 5-day. I'm not sure yet. Just see how it unfolds. But we completed with him, actually yesterday I did my final session in his 5-day process. And I'll wait until we have Peter on the phone until he gets a chance. He's flying this afternoon back to Sweden. I don't expect we'll hear from him on the show today, but we might. And we'll let him share the upshot of his final session of his 5 sessions. It's been cool to have a couple of days to just engage in the conversation with him, and sure appreciate his willingness to do that. So, Miss Jeannie, any thoughts for you, and or do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room?
No, I guess we've got to let Peter share first before we add our 2 cents, but it was awesome just seeing him process and what all he was going through. And there are no hands up, so if somebody presses 1, you're first in line. We have 50 minutes.
So if you're out there in listener land, our calling number, if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, is 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you're listening to the show directly, and then if you push 1, that'll raise a hand, and Jeannie will know that share with us. She'll introduce you by your area code. So we've been, for several days now, we've had lots of interfering conversations since we started a kind of a synopsis of the work a week ago Friday.
You have a hand up now.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go for it.
It's Miss Susan, 610. You're on the air.
So, all right. Well,
Welcome,
before
dear
getting down, hi. How are you? It was
I'm
great
rocking,
to
doing
see
well.
pictures on Facebook of Peter and you guys in these beautiful places, and then learning about Jeannie on Facebook. When you mentioned that you were calling in from Firestone, I thought you were just getting a tire or something. So, how's the car? What happened?
Oh, it was a $2,000 bill, but that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Life on the road.
You know, the car made a little bit of squeak or whatever when we were backing up anywhere, but then I had to hit the brakes real quick the other day, day before yesterday, and it made this horrible noise. So I thought, well, I'm going to get it checked. And Michael was working with Peter, so I went down to Firestone, and they had a ton of people there, so I told them I'd wait. Ended up being that they were going to have to replace an arm in the suspension and 4 rotors, 4 brake pads, and some bearings and bushings. And anyway, they were going to get done around 5 o'clock, and I'd already been there for 3 hours. And I said, okay. And we didn't have another car, so it was just around, it's like 1.5 miles. So after the radio show, I started heading home, walking. So
Jeannie.
I got back here all out of breath, but and then they called right before 5 o'clock and said it was ready, but they didn't have anybody to come get me. And I said, well, okay, I'll start walking. And he said, well, if you get an Uber, he said, I'll take it off your bill. And so I did it. I called an Uber and got him to drive me. I mean, like I said, it wasn't but 1.5 miles, and I think the Uber ride was $8. But, you know, it was just like, it was so hot at 1 o'clock, and that's why I was huffing and puffing.
God.
But I'm glad that, you know, I mean, we were out of town getting it fixed. Could have found someone, you know, cheaper at home, but I wasn't going to take a chance driving back over the mountains and everything with the brakes messed up. And so we went ahead and bit the bullet. But yeah, it was a little over $2,000.
That's awful. Oh.
Well, we're safe. That's good.
That is good. I have a related story to that car story, indirectly, and I want to make sure that Peter gets on. So, Jeannie, please, this is not important. Just flag me when he comes on. We lent our
I doubt seriously he calls in.
Well, he's at the airport, so yeah, it's likely we won't hear from him until he gets back home.
All right.
Back to Sweden.
Well, then I've got 2 things then. But the first one is just Tim and I have 2 cars now, and we've had them for years, and I hardly drive one of them. So we loaned it to a refugee who's living with our rector at our church. And he borrowed it. He had it for 9 months, and we thought our Michael could use it. And they had moved into town, so the job this guy had was within walking distance. So I got the car back, and it had a broken tail light. And when we took it in for its regular service, it also had a terrible damage to the under part of the car. And it was a $3,000 repair for the under part and $80 for...
Ouch.
Yeah, so 2 ouches, I feel for you. And And I thought, what do I do? Do I speak to this refugee? He's French-speaking. I have to use my very poor French with him, with a lot of help from Google Translate. And I mentioned to him about the light. We didn't know about the underpinnings. The light was obvious right away. And I got a friend of ours who is sort of an amazing guy who just ordered it on Amazon and put a new one on, and it was $80. But when we learned about the under part, I finally figured I ought to say something to him. I mentioned the light to start, and I just said, I wish you had told me. I didn't notice that the rear light was broken. The housing was wrecked. And he apologized and said, well, I was just going to take it in for the servicing. He was going to, because we didn't know we were taking it back. He was going to take it in, but of course we've been paying those bills. So I wondered if it was a cultural thing, or was he afraid, or what? And I didn't say anything to my rector, and we paid the bill, but then we had to leave it there because there was more wrong, and we didn't know what. Finally, we got this other thing. Turns out whoever was driving the car, and it was probably pretty much this refugee, had gone over something really harsh, a rock, and punctured the underpinnings to the point where it was really dangerous and they had to replace it. And I didn't know whether I should say anything to him or not. He hadn't mentioned that either. So we get on into all sorts of confusing personal issues, and he lost his job meanwhile, and he's living for free out of my rector's house. Well, so I spoke to my rector, and I said, I'm going to hire, his name is Nestor, I'm going to hire him to help me this summer with a huge refugee yard sale type of thing where we try to redistribute all we have in our wealthy houses, comparatively speaking, and find homes for furniture for the refugees. And I do need help. And in the discussion, I told my rector about the damage to the car, and he said, well, you've got to charge him. And I said, I cannot do that. He has no job. He's living for you for free. I'd like to hire him, explain to him about the tail light, and have him pay for that, $80, and just, work for 4 hours for me for nothing. How do you think? And he said, no, he should pay the whole thing. You see where I'm going? It's what is the right thing to do here? And I finally insisted that I wasn't even going to tell him about the damage to the underneath of the car, but my rector did. And he didn't remember anything, and they figured maybe during the winter there was some rough road or something, and he had heard it then. Anyway, I'm telling you this, and any input on any angle, what would you have done about that?
Well, the first thing I'd do is breathe and look for some guidance. What level of accountability is reasonable in a situation like that.
Yeah.
I can certainly identify with
something could happen.
Yeah. And you expect that someone would take responsibility. Then again, and someone who has no resources whatsoever, it's kind of hard for them to take responsibility. So it's a risk you take, and I guess that a personal decision as to whether you would choose to hold them accountable, and how you would hold them accountable, whether it be coming up with cash or, as you say, doing some jobs for you that would at least give you have him take some sort of responsibility, and you have some sort of compensation.
Well, my rector said, no, I'm going to have him, and the fact that he talked to him, this young man was very sweet to me. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I was going to have it fixed. Well, of course, he was going to have it fixed, and we were going to pay for it. So there is some slippage there. And I asked my rector, is it different in a different country? We don't understand one another. What are the customs? He said he didn't know either, but he did notice that this young man was in some ways not responsible in ways that we would be in our culture. And he was puzzled too. So I just said to him, I am not going to charge him, and I don't want you to talk about the damage to the car, but he already had. And so I'm sorry, because now my relationship with this young man, which was very friendly, you know, he's very expressive. He'd say, "Je t'aime," you know, he'd say, "I love you." And I think he was sincere, and he was becoming a friend. And I'm feeling that this may come between us now, because he may feel guilty or ashamed or awkward, at least. I don't know. Anyway, this is, deep breathing, and you don't know. But Tim and I knew we could lose this car, you know, to this. We were willing to put up the risk, and that seems to be that and Tim was okay. He just said, "Look, we did this, and we'll pay for it." And so that's the end of that. It's just the interpersonal. I wish the language were a little more facile, but maybe we can sit down and take some time to talk to one another. And I want to put him at ease, but also I had already said, in this country, I don't know whether it's true where you come from, we would tell the other about that, even if we couldn't pay for it. We would just mention, and you know, and so I think he understood that, and I think that's as far as it's going to go.
Well, it's nice that you were able to recognize the possibility of a different cultural tradition, and not just go in with something that would produce culture shock, and at least leave a door open for communication.
Yeah, and it's going to be very hard for my rector. He said, you know, he's living rent-free here. It's a little like what's happening with Michael here. We don't, now that he doesn't have a job, he could use a car to look for a job. But Tim has changed our insurance, and he's not on the list anymore, and Tim doesn't want to put him back on, because this new policy is tricky. And the fact that there was damage of the car, you know, it just screwed it all up.
Sounds like you've done your fair share in that.
Well, I guess so. I'd like to just give him the car, and Tim said, no, we're not doing that. So anyway, and he can't afford to have a car anyway. He, you know, I read somewhere that it costs about $12,000 a year to just have a car.
Yeah,
that's
kind of what it takes.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I wanted to report on an incredibly wonderful, and Michael, you'll appreciate this because I know you've been posting on Facebook, and I don't know how you handle it, whether you're breathing and you're neutral and you're calm throughout, but as things develop politically, they get to the point where anybody who doesn't have the tools is probably in pretty bad trouble unless they've got their head in the sand.
Some crazy stuff going on, for sure.
It is. So we come on, and last week we were on, and one of the members said, well, I just don't pay any attention to it. I don't know who I'm going to vote for. They're both equally bad. And I'm sitting there getting terribly triggered. So I didn't even talk. Other people were gentle, and they suggested that, well, if you really look at it, you do have to kind of make a decision and take some action, even if you're not going to watch the news, which we totally understand. So I was doing wake-up sheet this week on this person because I wanted to come lovingly to this meeting today. And there is one thing she had said that I could kind of build on. And I remember recently reading that you need 8 positive statements to undo 1 negative criticism. If a person's, you know, coming to you in your office and you're the boss, you have to make sure you build them up in many ways before you confront them on some problem. And I sort of went into it. And I said, you know, in the Bible, and I wanted to ask you this too, Michael, Jesus says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And I figured that's what you're doing on Facebook, and what we're all doing is we are taking care of the immediate stuff that's in front of us that is from this domain and handling it, we hope, with equanimity. But we have to tend to it if we're in bodies on the planet right now. So I introduced this as a sort of an idea. How does this strike you? That we do tend to these things. Pay attention enough to be able to take a wise decision, even if you feel very calm and peaceful, rather than triggered. And we ended up having a discussion, which isn't our intention usually on this MindShifter group. We usually do a wake-up sheet, or we talk to one another about some kind of problem, do a MindShifter or something. But
right.
It was a talk about what's going on politically and how we can take action without being triggered or harmful, and how, in the end, we can expand our consciousness to know that this is God's play and that we're all going to be all right, and that the ego is playing a huge part in all of our attitudes and actions. And I can't reproduce it, but it was one of the most, I wish you'd been there, but it's sort of good that you weren't, because it went exactly the way it went. And I didn't record it. I wish I had, but that's a lot to ask, to have somebody listen to it. But it was the most delicious thing, and I came away feeling released from a lot of anxiety about what's going on. At least for the moment, I feel as if I'm taking a breather between getting worked up again.
So, of course, you've never had anxiety about anything going on in the world.
Never.
But if you've got anxiety,
never
you can sure
have.
put it on anything that's going on. You can sure put it on anything that's going on in the world.
Shut up, Michael. You know, we've been talking about that for a long time. It's
it's been 5 years now, I think.
No, it's been more like 8, I think. No, you're right.
8?
And that came up, too, that we are generating this from our own prefabricated junk that we've been dealing with. And we talked about how nothing outside of me, I quoted you, I said, well, Michael would pipe up and say, nothing outside of you will cause you upset. Yes, we did that. We did a good job. It was great. And Tim's sister had joined us, and our very enlightened, amazing older man, John. You remember John,
right.
The 85-year-old man.
Hope his back is doing well.
Oh, he's in a lot of pain, but he spends a lot of time, as he says, sitting in his third eye. I'm going to have to make a cut out of that. This man seems sitting in the lotus position in the top of his own head. I love picturing it. But he said he had a thought, a powerful thought this morning, that Tim's sister, who has basically dropped out of the group, that she was going to visit. And she did. And I saw his face light up. You know, I happened to be looking at him when she showed up. And he called out her name, and then told her later, I had this message come to me this morning that you were going to visit today, and here you are. And my hair has been standing on end ever since you showed up. It was just adorable. He's handling his fragility, physical fragility, wonderfully. He's doing things about it. He's a homeopath, a naturopath like you, and is getting some physical therapy. But he's got some things probably wrong in there. He's going to have an MRI in a couple of weeks. Where am I going with this? This is a report, I guess. I just want to say this group is doing your work together. And
that's awesome.
The real win for me was to feel my allowing, relaxing, as Tim Hayes would say, soften and allow and breathe, and you say breathe, and putting all those to getting back in equilibrium with this particular woman on the group, who often jumps right to the enlightened conclusion, and I'm not there, and I'm trying to run after her, and I want to clobber her in the meantime because she's way ahead of me, and I can't do that yet. So
So oftentimes, I think the enlightened conclusion is a spiritual bypass. And there is a work to do. There are steps to be done. And, there's nowhere in the teachings of Yeshua that says don't hold people accountable if they do things that are insane. It doesn't say that. It says maintain Rahma, maintain a condition of love, and function from love. That's the first order of business. And people who don't pay attention or take responsibility for what's going on in the world and don't want to take responsibility, somebody will step up and say, well, if you're not going to be responsible for your life, I'll take control. I'll be in charge of your life. And the interest rate on that is extremely high. It's usury most of the time. And so I think people need to be able to take responsibility, to function from a space of love. Yesterday, I don't know if you were on the show yesterday, but we were talking with Peter, and as he was stepping up, of course, we wanted him to win the competition, but I had to work with my own mind to overcome the programming, the brainwashing of, well, in order for him to win, the other guy's got to lose, therefore I've got to hope for the other guy to lose. And that was, for me, that was a piece of work, to be able to hold each of them in equanimity, that each performs at their highest and best, and may the best man win, as opposed to, I want this one to flub it, I want this one to fail. And I think in the political realm, it's the same thing. I've shared before the lesson that I learned from Judge Asa D. Kelly, who was a Superior Court judge in Albany, Georgia, who, as a Superior Court judge, put thousands of people in prison, some of them for a long, long time, but he never punished any of them. And that was a really powerful lesson for me, that he would explain how much he cared for this person who had, perhaps committed a really heinous crime. And that, the community had taken up a collection and built a building with bars around it, and whoever wasn't safe in the community, they hired him to make sure that they didn't stay in the community, that they were in that building behind bars. But it wasn't punishment for them. It was accountability for those who were not wholesome in the community, that he held them accountable. And one of the games that a lot of people who, to say it kindly, aren't wholesome in the community play is that of obfuscation, that of creating all kinds of clouds and deceit in order for the average person to just give up and put up with it. And I think we each need to take responsibility, cut through what it brings up in us, do our work, and then step up with accountability and responsibility. And to me, sometimes I use language in the posts that I put on my Facebook page that is more based in the culture's language, because I'm communicating with the culture. I'm not communicating with people doing their work or people doing A Course in Miracles or what have you. And so sometimes I'm pretty blunt, and I do it purposely. And, one of the first things I did, there's an old favorite picture that I have of a certain politician with his son, and it's a really sweet picture. And when this incident happened the other day where he was ostensibly injured, although I have difficulty believing, knowing what I know about an AR-15 shell getting anywhere near anybody's body, I don't believe that even is conceivable in that situation. But I posted that picture of he and his son with a wish for support and caring and love, and at the same time accountability for behavior. And I think that's if that old statement of if good people do nothing, that's when evil takes over. And people need to step up and hold those energies that are off the mark accountable for what they do.
I agree, and that's pretty much where we landed in our group, including this person who said, yes, I do have to pay attention and be responsible. And she probably was going to do that anyway, but we reached a kind of peaceful agreement while we were working that we don't have to sell out and become completely embroiled in this world and give up all the spiritual growth we've ever made in order to do this. We can do this and remain centered and okay, too. So
Yes.
So
Yeshua went into the temple and held the money changers accountable for what they were doing.
right.
And he did it from a space of connectedness, although the Greeks translate or interpret his actions as something hostile and involving a whip, which is not even the least bit justified in the Aramaic. The word that the Greeks interpreted as a whip is actually a prigla, which is a word that represents a small broom that you'd sweep chickens out of the house with if you had a dirt floor.
Right.
And but he did go in with great clarity and enthusiasm and hold them accountable for what they were doing that was off base. And I think that it's our responsibility on a spiritual level to do that as well, as opposed to, I just lay down and let them walk all over me. That's an abdication of responsibility, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Well, so has anybody got a hand up? Because I've got a whole other tangent to go on, and I wanted to ask you about.
Let's go on that other tangent.
You have to tell the truth, though. I'm a
Always tell the truth.
Okay, I'm a one-issue.
I have no idea. I can't see it. Jeannie's the only one that can see that.
Thank you, Jeannie. Okay. Well, this is something I've been thinking a lot about, and it's a lifelong issue, and you've heard it before. But Dr. Tim, on his part of the show, was talking about how you can learn the lessons without getting attached to the teacher. I've had a history of getting attached to teachers. Not all of them. Attachment comes in two forms. One is healthy and one is not healthy, and I can tell the difference. And I'm very cautious when I know that the unhealthy one is in the vicinity. Well, I had such an attachment with a therapist I worked with years ago. She was 61 or 2 years old, and I was in my early 40s. And I unconsciously chose her, I'm sure, because she fit the good mother and the bad mother all in one. I was very drawn to her and very afraid of her. And she was a Freudian, so she would not tell me anything about her life at all. And one of my issues was always that I couldn't get information from my parents. They didn't talk about feelings. They didn't tell us what their plans were or why they were thinking about doing what they were doing. I felt shut out. One of my images of being a child is wanting to just break doors down so I could bust into a room and get the information, open drawers, read papers, find out what I needed to find out because I wasn't being told. So I became obsessed with finding out about this woman's life. And I might have told this, I told it on Dr. Tim's show. I walked on her street once I wanted to see where she lived. I got her address and went on her street and had such a panic attack that I didn't even look to the left or the right, never even figured out which house was hers, then went back to her office and confessed to her that I had been on her street, and she had this terrible reaction of, oh my God, you were stalking me. And she had this, Tim, thank goodness, said that was a very inappropriate response. She should have said something like, well, you're very brave to tell me this. Thank you so much. And what are you so curious about? Or something healthy. You know?
Yeah, it sounds like
anyway,
you gave her an opportunity to do a worksheet or two.
I did. But being who I was and who she was, I just felt guilty and like a bad girl, which is totally the way I always felt anyway about people in authority. So after 4 years of seeing her twice a week, I stopped working with her, explaining that I just didn't want to pay for coming in there and wanting her to like me and fearing that she didn't. And no matter what she did or said, I was not to be convinced because she was such a straight-laced Freudian. She wouldn't talk. So I couldn't get information, and I quit. And it was a friendly, exchange insofar as I just said, I appreciate all you've tried to do for me, and I realize I haven't fixed it. It's not your fault. I've got to go. Bye. And I left. And I kept in touch with her. She moved out of town. I would write her a note at Christmas for a few years, and she always wrote the generic appreciative, hello, nice to hear from you, I hope all is well, and nothing. I couldn't ever get anything. Well, she's now, I think she's still alive. She's 101 years old if she's still alive, and she's just published an autobiography. Well, who goes on to Amazon as fast as she could to get it? And I'm reading about her life and loving finding out who she was. She's a beautiful writer, a brilliant, poetic writer, and it's gone way beyond hoping that I could find myself in there somewhere, that she would mention a particular client that she liked very much. I would love to see that. I'm not far enough in the book to know if it's there, but I feel as if I'm being healed, at least with her, in simply finding out that she had a life that was very different than I would have ever imagined. A very varied life. She had a husband much older than she who suffered from anxiety and depression. She was often very lonely because their marriage was mainly, she was trying to shore him up, and he was a famous psychiatrist himself, psychoanalyst, and they were well known in town. I'm finding all this stuff out, and all I can think is, I feel as if little threads or bands across my chest are snapping open, one after the other. And I don't know whether this is an isolated cure with this one human, because the attachment that I had, I feel an incredible appreciation and love for her, but I also know I didn't know her. I just didn't know her. And so when Dr. Tim said, and I'm finally getting around to the point, he said, you don't have to be attached to the teacher to get the teaching. In my case, I think God found me people that I would fall in love with, and I would learn a ton from them, and then I'd be able to get on with my life. But falling in love was part of the way God handled me, because I was doing that anyway, and God is good. What do you think of that?
Well, my take, my offering would be that attachment, I don't know that attachment is ever healthy. When I hear them talking about, child and attachment with a parent, I would look more at connection as opposed to attachment. To me, attachment implies something that, while we're attached, we can't break loose. This is it, as opposed to a connection, which, is not something that's based in demand.
Yeah, that's true. That sounds true.
And it sounds like you're maybe opening some old wounds that you inflicted upon yourself with reading her story, and I think that's wonderful if you have inflicted some wounds or hallucinated some wounds because she wouldn't supply the information that you wanted, and that you're finally able to let go of that. And if you're physiologically feeling like that, that sounds like you're really opening some old resistances, which I think is wonderful.
Well, I'll tell you later, because I'm only about a third of the way through the book. But so far, so good.
Well, we'll hold the space that you breathe all the way through it, and where appropriate, pick up a worksheet.
Yeah. So the idea that maybe Dr. Tim is right, that you don't have to get an attachment in order to learn the lessons. And certainly, like with you, I can tell you, I love you and I'm nuts about you, but I don't feel that sick attachment. And you can probably tell. I just feel friendly and easy. And it's
to me, that's a connection.
Yeah, that's a connection.
Yeah, to me, that's a connection. It's not, I can pull your strings, you pull mine, and see who wins. To me, that's what attachment looks like. It has more to do with control than a
a relationship that's about wholeness and healing.
I think partly, though, and I may be wrong, partly it's because you and Jeannie are both so open about your own lives. Like Jeannie talks about her shoulder and her arms and her Firestone visit, and you're just a person. It's easy to relate person to person if the other person is all the way there and real. But if they're withholding stuff, I might or might not get hooked.
Right.
Anyway, that puts the responsibility on the other person. But I can't do that.
And when you talk about getting hooked, I would offer there's your next worksheet. Now you're back to that issue with your power person.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're clearing that one up.
Yep. And the title of this woman's book is The Tree Grows Standing Still. And in one of the blurbs it said that she realized that she never got over her major life issue or issues. I don't know what they were, but that she grew anyway. And I feel as if I'm doing that too, and I've mentioned that to you before in the radio show. I do think, now that I'm as old as I am, that I'll probably always have this fragility in one part of me, but I've had a great life built all around it and enriched by it even.
Well, and you've taken the opportunities to learn to heal and done your healing work, and that's the fruit of your labor that you get to enjoy, as opposed to the person who never does their work and so just lives in misery and isolation.
Mm.
That mean everything's
there was
perfect.
Enough. Yeah.
But if I let the active presence of love in, then every wound becomes a minor event rather than, oh my God, my whole life is tied up in my wounds. All I am is a walking wound.
Yeah. But I also think, in my case, I had enough of a healthy childhood and a loving mother that I could be well enough to have good relationships and a productive life and creative life. So I'm not, it's quite a challenge. I wonder about the kids in Gaza, for instance, who are so traumatized, whether they're not like my little sister. I think it was so much worse for her that she wasn't okay throughout her life, nor did she try to do any of the work, but she wasn't available or healthy enough to do the work.
To reach
she
out.
Didn't want to know. Yeah, she didn't want to know about it. And so she really just watches TV all day and Tim pays her rent, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, breathing with you and bringing love to everything in you that relates to the circumstance with your sister.
Yeah, and that's ongoing, Michael. That does, there's a lot of work being done all the time on that. And we've had our good patches and bad patches. Yeah. But I was lucky to be the fourth kid and not the fifth kid.
Well, the fact that you're able to hold a space for her is a pretty awesome gift.
It's like a pimple. It keeps filling up with pus. And I have to clean it out.
Next worksheet.
Yep, I know. It is.
So we're holding the space with you for her.
Thank you.
Well, any other thoughts, young lady?
Well, I could give an update on the Michael in our house business, which is that ostensibly he's been approved for this HUD housing in Jacksonville, but they're on vacation this week, so we're not doing anything all week, and we're still in limbo because the final word hasn't come down, that the room is there and he can pack up and go. And he seems very lame. His back is painful. His knees are bad. He walks with difficulty. And I'm just, if you would hold the space for him to decide it's safe to go, even being driven down by my son, that he can do that. And it'll be good rather than just so terrifying. He's afraid about the administration. He's afraid his Social Security, which is what he lives on, will be taken from him. So there's a lot of angst there, too. He's very fragile.
So I join with you and Tim both in being able to hold the space for him to be accountable and step into what he has to face next in his life. And I hear that it's been extremely difficult for him.
Yeah, it is. Right. So thanks for listening to all that.
All right, young lady, while holding the space and holding you in a blessing.
Thanks, and you're coming home tomorrow, right? Will you be on tomorrow? No, you'll be traveling probably.
We'll be traveling tomorrow.
We have a pre-recorded show planned. It's a good one, though. It's from 2019 with Sam Brotherton.
Oh, and I won't be able to listen to. Well, I will in the car. I've got to do something. But anyway, good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll be driving tomorrow. So.
Okay. Safe travels.
All right.
Thank you.
Lots of love and blessings. All right.
Thanks. You too. Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, dear heart, we've got about, 6 or 7 minutes left?
8.
So do we have anybody? 8 minutes left. Wow. We've got an abundance of time if there's another hand up. Let's
and there's not.
see if there's a question.
Somebody press 1.
Somebody has been thinking of that question over and over and over, but afraid to put your hand up. It's only 8 minutes. Push 1. Let's have a conversation. How can we support you? What question have you been burning to ask about this work, about these tools, about first century Aramaic forgiveness? One of the things that has struck me with Peter that actually we went over several times in our processing over the last 5 days of doing the quantum still point was how things are healed in layers. And when you start recognizing, this is actually part of my conversation with him on the way to the airport, taking him to the airport was, why am I not finished yet? And when you look at what is in our genes, if we just take the scriptural idea of 4 generations, that comes down to every thought, every feeling, every reality of the previous 4 generations, which is 31 lives, is in our structure and forms the basis of the perceptual output of our mind, the stories we tell ourselves. And then if you, go back from that 4th generation back, then you start looking at, I've gone back to, 30 generations. You're talking about 1.6 billion people in your genes, and the fact that we live in a world that has advanced so far compared to what it was 100, 200, 300, 500 years ago in terms of personal security, personal aliveness, personal possibilities. I mean, it's monumental, but that doesn't mean that it's cleaned up. Is in us from the previous generations. And so as one does one's work, one becomes more vital, and becoming more vital is more able to access deeper layers of what needs to be dealt with. And, one of the focal points in the quantum still point is looking at physical intensity and paying attention to how the structure recruits muscles and in resistance to allowing a particular energy to move through the structure. And when you realize, the way that if you've got a light in your room and you've got a rheostat on the wall, why is it that you can turn it on, the light's very dim, and then you go through, you run that rheostat, and the light gets brighter? How does that happen? Well, basically, all the rheostat is doing is incrementally adding resistance into the circuit or taking resistance away from the circuit. So when you have that rheostat at full low, there's a lot of resistance in the rheostat, and that means that there's not as much current flow to light, and the light is dim. When I turn the rheostat in the opposite direction, it removes the resistance from the circuit so the light gets brighter. And as you really pay attention in your physiology to, an ache or a pain or something happens, if you pay attention to everywhere in your structure that goes into resistance to that, and you turn that resistance down, then just like the current flow in the circuit for the light, the current flow goes up, the power flow goes up, the energy flow goes up. And it's the same thing in physiology. And we really can't access the deeper levels of those energetic patterns that we need to deal with until we've got enough current flow, literally energy flow, to be able to access those things. And so as you build vitality, there's more, that's one aspect of it, eating properly, drinking fluids, staying hydrated, thinking, that's powerful in terms of causing or supporting the operating system to work. But the other end of the cycle is removing the resistance, even if it's just mental resistance. Don't make me look at my life. That shuts down energy flow. That's what creates what's called the unconscious mind. I think that the unconscious mind is a total aberration. We are not designed to have an unconscious mind. But when I go into resistance, and you'll notice when there's something you don't want to look at, something you don't want to feel, one of the first things you do is you shut down your breath. That turns down the power. And so one of the objectives is to get the power up to full flow, as full as it will possibly move. And that means that no energy can be held down in the system when there is a full flow. And so just paying attention as you go through your day and the situations that resonate things for you, choosing to breathe into them and let go of resistance. And it might be, your big toe. It might be your buttocks. It might be a shoulder. It might be an eyebrow. It was kind of fun with Peter, and he shared a little bit about this the other day, so I'm not telling tales out of school, but when things would start moving, one of the things that would happen is creases all across his forehead. It was all of a sudden turn into this wrinkled set of creases across his forehead. It's like, oh, so notice your forehead, take a breath, let it soften. And bingo, there would be another memory. And so just, suggesting, watching your own physiology for resistance, especially when there are issues up, and recognize you can't get to the root of that resistance until there's enough energy flowing through the circuits, literally the circuits, to make that accessible. And, of course, one of the ways of increasing that energy flow is by maintaining your breath, by simply allowing your breath to move. And that is why the still point breathing process is such a key piece in the puzzle of healing. And letting go of resistance. So delighted to share this time. I hope that your listening today has been of benefit. If, as you do worksheets or engage in the tools, you come up with questions, I invite you to keep a notebook or have a notepad in your phone where you keep those questions so when the show comes on, It's not,
Oh, I remember I had a question 3 days ago, but I don't remember what it is now. I'll write it down. The shortest pencil is longer than the longest memory. So write it down, and please, it's the lifeblood of the show to have somebody's conversation and questions and thoughts. So appreciation, blessings, and the rest of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to you.